All right, grasshoppers, we are back. I begged her to come back on the show again. She just didn't want to do it. She's kicking and screaming. So, Jackie Long, how are you? Good to see you again.
Great. How are you, Tom?
Doing great. Well, the Rangers lost. So I bring that up because how I met Jackie was we were on the bus. We went to Raleigh for Game 5 of that series, the Rangers and the Carolina Hurricanes. And getting on the bus after the game, I sat beside this nice young gentleman who works for the Rangers and the Knicks. And we got talking about leadership and everything. And then he obviously is your husband and told me what you're doing. And the mental health subject is seems like it's becoming a bigger topic for everybody. Something that I don't know if you call it interest or whatever. It just seems like I think it's such an issue that it needs to be addressed even more. So we're going to touch on that a little bit. Jackie Long is a hypnotist. So I do want to touch on that first. We kind of laughed about it last time. I think about a lot of people that aren't familiar with hypnosis. Think like an old movie where there's a clock dangling in front of your face and you pass out and start babbling away, right? We touched on it briefly. Do you mind explaining like how, or can you talk about how you get somebody in that state of hypnosis?
Yeah. So honestly, it's really simple. And I also like to explain it this way. It's a very natural state that we go in and out of all day long without knowing it. So when you're first waking up, when you're about to fall asleep, if you get really engrossed in a book, in a movie, and somebody's calling your name and you don't really hear them, or you're driving somewhere and it's really automatic for you and you get there and you're like, oh, how did I get here? You were lost in thought or daydreaming. All of those states are the same thing as a hypnotic state. Just in a session in hypnotherapy, we're using that state to help you reach your goal on purpose. And we're giving you lots of positive suggestions based on what you want so you can achieve that goal faster or, help heal trauma, things like that. So it's a very natural state that I think most people don't realize we already go there.
And you're able to, through the things you say to them, you're able to get them into that state?
Yeah. So, first the person has to want to engage in the process, right? It's not something I can just, force on a person. They have to want to engage in that process. It requires reclining or lying down, closing your eyes, being in a relaxed space. And then through the types of words I say, the sequencing, the tone of my voice, some neuro-linguistic programming, which is just how you're saying something. All of that helps relax that critical thinking mind and get somebody into that more calm state.
And so it doesn't get them to the point where they're just babbling away, talking about everything. It's just it opens up more. They relax and they open up more, right?
Absolutely.
We should try to do that to me sometime on a show and see how. That might be scary though. I might have to tape it first to see how it goes.
Yeah, maybe in a private session first.
That would be funny. Wouldn't that be funny? Oh God. Do people ever is it surprising then to people what comes out of their mouth, how they talk?
Yeah, sometimes people are surprised with how relaxed they feel or how deep they can go or what things might come up for them in that space. Yeah.
Right. And again, like you said, if somebody's just a total non-believer, it's pretty hard for you to get them to that state.
If someone is really resistant, doesn't want to, go under hypnosis or engage in the process, it won't work. It will not work, right? Because
they wouldn't be in front of you anyways, right? They know they're coming to you to get hypnotized.
Right.
Very interesting. That's cool. Like I said at the start of we first met and started talking about it, I was like, I bet I'm assuming most people just don't understand that's really what hypnosis is.
Yeah, a lot of people do not realize unless they've done the research or been exposed prior.
Right. So the mental health field, are you pretty well versed? Is that part of your training, understanding mental health?
Yes, because I was a school psychologist previously, so I have a master's degree and been in the mental health space for a long time. And then even with hypnotherapy, mental health is a huge part of that because people are coming for mental health issues. So I definitely find it beneficial to have a lot of background training in mental health for sure.
Right. So one of the topics we talked about briefly before the show, and I don't know if I've fallen into this, but it's the mental health world has kind of become. I'm getting way more well versed in the mental health world. Not to say that I'm an expert by any means at all, but I think I just have a better understanding of things. I don't know if I ever told you a story, but way back many years ago, I was in the agent business representing players, and I had a young player who's kind of got to be a famous story now, but he had been sexually abused by his junior coach who was starting when he was 14 years old. And he was in the NHL. When he came to me, I didn't realize at the time he was a great guy, but he was always getting himself in trouble, drugs and alcohol and drinking and driving. And I knew him. I was living in Detroit at the time. I represented another player that was on the Detroit Red Wings, and through that met this player, Sheldon Kennedy is his name. And he came in and asked me to represent him at first, and I tried to give him the fatherly lecture. I didn't know anything about the abuse at that time, and then he called me up about a week later and told me how he'd been abused, and that was a real eye opener for me. I'd never dealt with that kind of stuff. I was a farm boy, hockey player from Canada. Didn't even know. I mean, I knew what abuse was. Didn't know what. I was very lucky. The NHL and the NHL Players Association had a program put together, a team of doctors to deal with a lot of issues, drug, alcohol, abuse, all that different kind of stuff. So they were able to step in and really help out a lot. But that was the start for me to really start to understand, what happens to people that abuse. Some people, I've heard comments where it may take years or decades for abuse victims to come out and talk about it. And people say, why'd they wait so long? Well, you don't know what their support system is or anything like that. So the mental health world. So and recently, I guess somewhat tied to the pandemic, I guess we can assume there's been more an uptick in suicides as well. And even people just talking about wanting to hurt themselves more. Do you get people coming to you with like that?
I do. And I have a lot of experience in that in terms of when I worked in the schools. Unfortunately, this happens with kids too, kids and teens, having those feelings. So it's, there's definitely a need for more resources around that. As a hypnotherapist, I have certain intake forms, and I'm not a doctor. I'm not a licensed, mental health professional. I don't have my PhD. So technically, when someone comes to me with those types of thoughts or feelings, I certainly speak to them, and then I, refer them to someone that I know can really help in that area. In terms of ethics, I could help in conjunction with their mental health professional, but I wouldn't just kind of take that on alone.
Are you required to do that by law, or is that just something you work?
Yes.
Right. So now, one of the things I wonder is if it's even proper, like let's say you know somebody really well, maybe you don't know them that well, but you're talking to them, you're having a conversation, you're just getting the sense that like this person's really down. Is it appropriate to come right out and ask them if they're contemplating hurting themselves?
You can, yeah. And actually, that's some of the things I even had to do with kids is ask, do you have a plan? What are you planning to do? And it feels a little counterintuitive because sometimes you might worry, am I putting this idea in their head, or am I giving them a thought? But really, all of the time, if they are serious, they've already thought of how, or, these thoughts are already there for them. And it's almost a relief for them to hear someone else say it out loud, and they don't feel like they're just harboring this on their own.
Yeah, like to get to that point. Yeah, you're right. That's just, I should be careful. I guess there's no one size fits all kind of thing, but it doesn't, this over a period of time this happens, or is it sometimes when people have the thought, listen, things, I've had it. It's gotten so bad. I'm going to hurt myself.
Yeah, it can be. A lot of times it's usually something's going on in their life that's led to this feeling of hopelessness, right? Like you mentioned, sexual abuse. If someone has been through trauma, if they don't see a way out, or they are just feeling really hopeless or really depressed over time, they might feel like there's no other way out of that,
Right. All right. So it's appropriate then if you sense something's going on to ask the person, are you contemplating hurting yourself? If the answer then is yes from that person, young person, old person, whatever it is, do you sit and have a conversation at that point? Or do you say, listen, I'm going to stick by you here, but we're going to get you some professional help?
Yeah, I would do both of those. Definitely would stay with them. Definitely call whoever you need to call and get them professional help. Yeah, I wouldn't leave them alone, that type of thing, and make sure they know, you're there for them.
Right. So if they've gotten to the point where they're willing to admit to another person that, yes, they've contemplated hurting themselves, it could happen at any time. There's no timetable for that, right?
Yeah. So that's the hard part. There's no way of knowing how serious someone is, if and when they're actually going to follow through with it. I feel like I always err on the side of caution and always treat it as, well, if these thoughts are there, you never do know if something can happen. So always err on the side of caution and make sure there's help available.
It's got to be hard, right, too, for that person to talk about, because you think there's so many different reactions. Like, growing up on the farm for me, and I know that was years ago, but there's some of that, and you still hear it somewhat where people say, these kids have got to toughen up, right? They got to deal with this stuff.
Yeah.
But
yeah. You do hear that a lot. And, my response to that is, it's such a different world, right? And so maybe in your generation or your parents' generation growing up on the farm, it was different hardships, right? Not that anything is more hard or less hard to deal with, but now kids are just facing a lot of, everything with the social media and all this different kind of stress that, brings on a lot of different feelings, I think, for them, and it can be tough. A lot more isolation too, right?
Yeah.
Even in my time growing up, we didn't have the phones and the internet till I was, maybe older. So it was a lot of, you just saw people face to face. You
Yeah.
played outside. It was different.
Yeah, playing sports for me and everything. You're always around people all the time and interacting. And yeah, you're right. There's different, there's peer pressure and bullying and all that kind of stuff. You see a lot of that now too. I had a buddy of mine, obviously I won't mention the name, but he'd contacted me recently, and his daughter, he didn't get into details, but his daughter had considered suicide, and she was in the hospital, I think, too. So do you think the numbers that are going up, like both, like in all areas, like depression, the diagnosis of depression, anxiety, suicide, are those numbers going up?
Unfortunately, yes. Yeah.
Do you think that's a byproduct because there's more diagnosis, there's more people seeking out help, or is it actually more cases?
So that's hard to say. I think it could be a little bit of both. I think we're more aware now. And there's, I think maybe back in the day, people just kept these things to themselves or tragic things happened. So I think there is a lot more diagnosis. There's a lot more attention on it. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of different stressors happening in the world today that maybe a lot of us didn't have to deal with, years and years ago, in terms of being able to access every piece of information, every bad thing happening all over the world, not just in your community, but everywhere. And, so many things, kids comparing themselves, the social media game, all of that, the isolation. So I think there are a lot of factors that are contributing.
Right. Again, this is Jackie Long. She's a company, it's Jackie Long Hypnosis is the name of your company. And they can find you. I think you're on your Facebook, Instagram.
Yeah, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, you get your
Jackie Long Hypnosis. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, good. So you can contact Jackie. And again, the bulk of this is done now, if not all of it, is online, correct? You're not seeing patients face to face now.
Correct. Yeah.
And that doesn't hinder you at all. You're just as capable of doing it. That's interesting.
No, it's fabulous. People don't have to travel or be stressed out in traffic.
Yeah.
You can just lay down at home and relax.
That's true.
That's nice.
It's easier to get help then. Danny is turning out to be a very thoughtful individual here. Sometimes we see a lack of sympathy and a lack of understanding or willingness to understand. Right. I mean, because sometimes people just don't want to deal with it. Right.
Yeah. Sometimes it's people they've never been exposed or don't get it, or they don't want to get it because it's scary for them.
Right. Yeah. So here's a good friend of mine too. She was a trainer at the Lifetime in Harrison, New York. I think Johanna's down. I think she's out in LA now. I believe she is. But she's really big into yoga, not just the physical portion of the yoga, but the whole world of yoga. And so she likes this stuff too. I figured she would.
That's awesome.
So you're a parent, and you think that she's in Miami. I apologize, Joanna. So you're a parent and you think that you have this feeling about your son or daughter that they're depressed, or you're worried they might be considering suicide. Do you go right to them and ask them, or do you get them some help, some professional help first?
I would speak to them right away. As the parent, you want to start talking to them about that. Chances are most kids know what that is, right? They see YouTube videos, their friends talk about it. There's something going on. They are pretty aware of all of these very adult issues. So I think it's best to just go right to them, start talking to them. If they deny it, but you still have that feeling, I would say, you know what, let's still go talk to someone. Let's get you into therapy. Let's do it together, family therapy, whatever it may be that you think could be helpful.
Right. Because sometimes kids just don't want to talk to their parents about stuff. They'll talk to somebody else.
Yeah. You want them just talking to somebody.
Yeah, very true, right? And do you think it's helpful, like you said, some people would think, well, geez, if we plant the seed in these kids, like make this suicide seem like it's something that's happening all the time, the kids are going to think about it even more, as opposed to not talking. Like, I think we don't address the issue that I think we touched on it before. Is one of the things I've learned. If you break your leg or break your arm, you go to a doctor.
Yeah.
If you've got a mental health issue, it's no different. You can get cured. You go get help. Medication is part of it. and you get help, and then you'll be fine. I think people still feel like there's that stigma there that I don't want to say anything because then people are going to think I'm crazy, right?
Yeah, I mean, the stigma's still there a little bit. I think it's getting better and better the more we have these types of conversations and the more, even celebrities and things are kind of normalizing or rallying around that. I think that's helpful for sure.
Right.
But yeah, it's happening.
So have you had people when you've hypnotized them, they weren't really talking about suicide before, but then once you've hypnotized them, they then open up and say that they have had thoughts about hurting themselves?
No, no, I would fully vet a client, prior, to make sure if that's something happening in your life, something actively happening, we would have a different discussion about that. And I would want to make sure with your current therapist if hypnosis will be helpful and beneficial for you, or if in this state it's too fragile to go so deep. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay. Oh, so if they have those thoughts and don't know they're there, then all of a sudden they go into hypnosis and they then mention that's out of control at that point. Is that?
That has never happened. I don't think that would happen. If it did, I would just, work with it, heal it in the session, and then we would come out, talk about it, and get that person the help that they need.
Right. And you mentioned isolation before. A lot of kids, I was talking about this one coach or teacher saying that in some cases they're canceling finals because of suicides, that they're worried, the stress they're putting on the kids and everything.
Yeah, the kids really like tests. I remember when I worked in the schools, I mean, kids would have breakdowns, like full on, really huge anxiety over tests and grades. And I mean, I remember being a kid, you're always like a little nervous.
Yeah.
Okay, have to do well. And some people don't care, and some
Yeah.
people care more. And it just depends on what's going on for that kid. And
I guess it's the expectations too, like the family members, how much pressure they're putting on them. Yeah.
I think it's expectations. I think also there's a lot of nervous system dysregulation going on. And that, who knows, that can be from so many things, what we're eating, what we're not eating,
Right.
what we're exposed to,
And like I said, there's that perception that there's all these perfect people out there on Instagram and Facebook. And again, it's perception.
Yeah.
So everybody else, the other kids feel like, well, I'm not going to be like that. I'm not beautiful like she is. I'm not built like she is. So, yeah.
And the filters are scary, especially for young kids, because they think that's how somebody looks.
Right.
And nobody looks like that, right?
And again, if that's all the information they're seeing. They're not out there on the beach in Miami or whatever. They're all the information they're getting is what's on Instagram and Facebook or TikTok or whatever. Yeah. Danny's got some good stuff here. Oh, let me just get his comments up here. I love building self-confidence in a person, but I'm always concerned the person may not just be acting to make me feel that they're on board with what I'm saying. That's interesting, right? I mean, some kids, are they just going to tell you what you want to hear?
Absolutely. Some will.
Right.
You'll kind of know, right? We all have that gut feeling. You'll kind of know if somebody's just saying to say it, or if they are really starting to feel, yeah, I believe this about myself. But I always say someone who is struggling with self-confidence sometimes needs somebody else to believe in them before they can believe in themselves. So I think what you're doing is great.
So if you're like, that's a good point. So coaching, teachers, parents, people has to, yes, you have to discipline and you have to teach some lessons and everything, but it's important to reinforce, hey, you're a fantastic person. Great job with this, right?
Yeah. Find the things that you can praise.
Yeah. I saw a fantastic video a few years ago. This guy was in his driveway. I'm assuming he was teaching his son, and he was boxing, teaching him how to box.
Oh, cool.
And the father was, he was very aggressive. But he wasn't yelling at his son. He wasn't being abusive like that, but he wanted his son to learn. So clearly the son wanted to learn. And the son started to cry at some point because the father kept correcting him, wasn't doing it properly. The father was fantastic. I wish I'd kept the video, but he was fantastic in that he stopped him. He said, listen, it's not that you're not going to be able to do this. Or again, I paraphrase him, but it's basically saying to him, listen, you just don't know how to do it yet. You're going to learn. You'll get this. Yeah. And then he continued to teach the boy, and he started to learn things. So the tears turned into, now the kid's all fired up because he realized that, yeah, if my dad's right, I didn't know it before, but now it was a fantastic video. It was just like the father really took the time to say, okay, we're going to fight through this. I guess that doesn't solve all the problems, right? But I mean, it's like, so many kids just don't feel good about themselves and they need that reinforcement, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a great example, though. I like that.
Yeah, it was good. God, I'm so mad at myself I didn't save it. It was a very inspirational. You're watching it and you're getting tears in your eyes, because this poor little boy's crying, and the dad is just incredible. I don't know if he was a teacher or a parent or coach or what he was, but he was really good. Really good. Again, so this is Jackie Long Hypnosis. You can get her on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. I believe you're on. You've got your own website. You can contact Jackie, and this is all done virtually. You don't have to go into office or anything. And again, I think it's important that we keep repeating, because I assume, like a lot of people, like I had this perception that you're being hypnotized and you're in this state where you just don't know what's going on. You're babbling. That clearly is not the case. Can you describe it one more time? I just want to think it's important that people hear this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you fully remember. First of all, you want to participate. You give your consent to participate. For me personally, I discuss everything we're going to do before I put a client into hypnosis. We talk about your goals in depth. We talk about everything that you want to program your mind with, right? I'm not just making up stuff that I think is important for your mind to hear. It's going to be very specific to what you want to achieve, whatever your goal is. So, and it's just going into a relaxing state, quieting that chattering mind and working on that from that inner space. And it is a very natural state that we go in and out of all day long naturally. Most people just don't realize that. So we're inducing that state on purpose so that you can work towards your goal.
Can we say it's in the same kind of field as meditation? Is it similar to that?
Similar. It's like meditation with a goal, right? So instead of the mind, the purpose a lot of times of meditation is to quiet the mind and basically have like a blank mind. With hypnosis, we are filling the mind, filling that space, that inner space with the things that you're wanting.
I have some former teammates that have a blank mind all the time, but that's a different story altogether. That's cool. I like that a lot. I'm really getting more into like the state. And again, I want to be careful. If somebody's on medication, I'm not trying to suggest to get off the medication, but I think the more we can do without medication, the better, right? I mean, do things naturally to help ourselves.
Yeah, it really depends what you're going through, right? Some people, they really need that. And again, it might be one chapter of their healing process, or it might be something you need long term. And there's no shame in needing or not needing it. And it's really, you speak with your doctor on what's going to work best for you. But if you're trying everything and still coming up against a wall, maybe you need that little extra help. But of course, and really most people that come to me, if they are on medication, a lot of them want to get off of it or want to find ways to do things naturally. And I would totally understand that because, nobody likes side effects or things like that.
In a lot of, I guess it depends on the situation, but I'm sure there's a lot of cases where you're put on medication with the goal to just get you to a certain level and then get you off the medication.
Yeah, I think that is the purpose a lot of the time, to kind of pull you out of that space, work on it with your therapist, work on things. And then when you feel, stable, obviously you have to monitor getting off of it with your therapist to make sure you're in a good space. But listen, it can be really life-saving. So I definitely,
Right. So if somebody's got a mental health issue, is that the appropriate way to say it? That's not disrespecting, right? Just a mental health issue.
Mental health issue, a mental health, something going on with your mental health.
Right.
Yeah.
And that could be depression, anxiety, PTSD, all that kind of stuff.
A whole range. Yeah, it can be any of those things.
Right. And then in most cases, are the people already on medication when they come to you?
Some are not. And that's not to say they all need to be, right? So, but it just is a mix.
And do you think, I guess it's kind of tough, right? Do people with mental health issues, is this something they're born with? Is something that happens over time, things have happened to them? Or I guess it's a mix there too.
It's both, right? Some people are born with certain things that may have been carried down through generations, and some that I tend to feel with mental stuff and emotional stuff, a lot of times it's really environmental. And I personally tend to believe like you may have genes for something, but they get turned on by the environment, right? Some kind of stressor turns it on, and even things like PTSD, that's obviously based on something that occurred in your life. So a lot of times it's environmental, but you can't rule out the genetic piece as well. If someone's born with something, because sometimes you see really, really young kids develop things, and it's almost like, well, how can they develop that at such a young age? And you do kind of have to weigh in maybe they were born with it. Yeah.
Years ago, I saw a veteran. He had suffered from PTSD, and he was speaking and suggested that they try to remove the D from PTSD, not call it a disorder. It was just post-traumatic stress. I thought it was pretty interesting, right? Because it almost magnifies an issue saying, well, you've got this disorder that's
Yeah, I've been hearing it both ways now. I've been hearing it called PTS a lot more. And I know there's like some shows where they show Navy SEALs, and I know they say it a lot. They call it PTS in the show. Yeah, and I think that's great. I think we're just starting more and more to move away from calling it a disorder, calling it a problem, and just saying, hey, these are just things that we're dealing with as humans in life.
Yeah, the disorder gives the connotation, right, so that you've got something wrong with you. But it's just
something going on, and that needs a solution that needs to be addressed. But yeah, I think it kind of separates it from the individual a little bit. Like, you're dealing with something, but it's not who you are.
Yeah, I've done a show a few times with this fantastic young girl up in Canada, this Jill Brown. If I mentioned, she was in an abusive relationship and was diagnosed with PTSD. Okay. And it was interesting her talking. So she basically had to leave the home she was at and had to sleep in a tent. She bought a tent for like $60 and slept in the tent for months. Wow. And she went to a therapist and was diagnosed with PTSD by this therapist up in Canada. It was interesting to listen to her talk about how little things like in his office, he had pictures of himself with his family all over the office, and how much made it worse for her because here she was without a family. Yeah. I just was, and I guess you can't be so like, I mean, you can't do everything to not affect somebody that's going through things, but just those kind of little things, right? Like, make sure I don't know, would the doctor have been better off to not have those pictures, or is that just something to say, well, listen, you can't change his life? Right.
It's probably good the pictures were there because it brought something up for her to tell him, hey, this is how I'm feeling. And then they could really work on that. I mean, there's going to be, especially with PTS and PTSD, there's going to be triggers everywhere. They're different for every person, right? And they have to learn how to re-engage with the world and feel good. So it's almost better that it was in that, in a safe environment to say, hey, this is triggering me, basically.
Right. Our friend Danny, you've put a comment up here, and I don't know if you want this. It's regarding your son. I don't know if you want this up there publicly. If you do, I'll put it up there. We can discuss it. If you don't, that's fine. I just want to be careful. I don't put something up there I shouldn't. That's private. So again, I just want to make sure everybody understands this is Jackie Long Hypnosis. The stuff, the more and more we talk about it, the more you've convinced me. I was very honest the first time. It's like hypnosis, but it's, I love this stuff. I love the young lady that was on before, Johanna, talking about the yoga and all that, the meditation and all that stuff. I just see before I would never had suggested that's good stuff. The whole natural stuff now is like, I grew up in the environment. There's something wrong. Let's go grab a 6-pack of beer, and that's how you go to figure it out, right? And I'm sure that a lot of people. My fantastic parents have both passed away now. My mother, probably when I was like 10 or 11 years old, she had some kind of an issue at home. My father had sold our farm, and he was a firefighter. He'd gone off to his firefighting school. So it was my sister at home with my mother. And just one night, she just lost control of herself and was crying uncontrollably. And the reason I bring that up is, again, my parents, it was never discussed. The cousins came over, family came over, and my mother didn't leave the house for like a year, it seemed like. But eventually it got better to the point where she just went on with regular life. But it was never discussed with us as kids. And I just like, and again, my parents are incredible. So anybody's listening to know my parents, they were fantastic to me. But I wish at some they had sat down and talked about it, because it's still one of those things. It's almost like, it's your mother, and you're scared as a little kid. You're sitting there watching.
Of course. And then you're wondering what's going on. But that, and I think that's the difference too. And like, I even know with my grandparents, their generation too, like, things did happen, but it was never talked about. So I think these things have always been going on, but nobody ever talked about them. It was swept under the rug, and now people talk about them. So
do you get into that with your clients or patients then when they come to see you about, if they're, let's say it's an adult and they have kids in the home and something's happened, do you get into talking to them about that they should have a conversation with their kids?
It depends. If they bring it up and are telling me that their actions or their behaviors they know are affecting their kids, or they have kids in the home, we do talk about that. Yeah.
Good. Yeah. All right. Dave said it's okay for me to put it up there. It's regarding his son. So my son suffers from anxiety, and I was told by his therapist that my son doesn't like pressure. Yet he was the kid that the coach wanted out there in overtime. He played deck hockey, and he excelled at the moment. Interesting. So he didn't like the pressure, but he did well under pressure.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think all of us get a little bit of anxiety before having to do something that's, you're under pressure, have to
Yeah.
perform. So for him, I wonder if it's the more he does those things and excels, the more confidence he might get, rather
Yeah.
than the more we avoid something we're afraid of, actually it becomes bigger and scarier,
Right.
and then we never want to do it or do
Right.
anything. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing for me now. So I do a lot of public speaking, and for years I talk about hockey all the time. That's fine, but now
Yeah.
it's more motivational stuff. And there's a few times if you at first you're kind of a little nervous getting up there in front of a big group of people, right? But yeah, you got to push yourself through it. But I guess there we get to that point again now. Do we say, okay, in that case with the son, do you push him through it and make him do it, and then he gets used to it and realizes he can do it? He believes in himself more, and then he's happy that he's got through that process to do it. Or are you potentially doing damage to him because you pushed him so hard into that pressure situation, right?
It really depends. I think you need to have a real conversation with him about, pushing him to that. Are there ill effects, right? Is he then talking about self-harming behaviors because he had to do this thing? Or is he like, okay, I'm past it, I did it, I feel good. And then the next time he's just like, oh, I don't want to do it again, right? That might be a situation where you're like, you encourage and you help and support and push him through.
Right.
Really depends on what kinds of things are occurring afterwards. And I just think open communication, of course, is the best.
Because I do think about myself. I think, God, if I didn't push myself through those situations, up all the things I would have missed in my life.
Oh, same.
Yeah. But yeah, then you think like if my son, if he's going through it, you love your son or your daughter or whatever it is, and you don't want them going through something they shouldn't be. Interesting stuff. Well, great conversation, Jackie. I keep wanting to call you doctor for some reason. I know you're not. So maybe I'll just start calling you doctor. That's it. Again, this is Jackie Long Hypnosis. You can go to Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, got your website. Fantastic stuff. I learned a lot about it. I'm really learning more and more. And we'll continue to do this show at 1:00 every Tuesday.
Yeah.
We may miss some shows. Jackie will be busy now. But this is great. Seriously, it's great stuff. If anybody needs help, wants to talk, you can reach her at all those outlets, and great stuff. Learn a lot. Thank you very much, Jackie. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.